Hello and welcome back to the Biochemistry for Health Sciences channel. In today's video, we shall discuss the absorption, distribution, metabolism, as well as excretion of sodium, which is basically the life story of sodium in your bloodstream. Sodium is one of the several tests which is part of the comprehensive metabolic panel, and blood sodium is about 140 millimolar. This is the ion that is present in the highest concentration in the extracellular fluid, such as blood. Sodium is also very rich in secretions, such as sweat, tears, as well as secretions from the gastrointestinal tract. In the next few videos, we shall discuss various aspects of sodium, and in order to try to connect this important biochemical analyte with physiology as well as pathology and pharmacology. So we'll talk about the ADME of sodium, various transport proteins for sodium, as well as receptors that send sodium, the association of sodium with blood volume as well as blood pressure, the very, very important physiological system called the renin-angiotensin system, or the RAS. Then we'll discuss high blood sodium levels or hypernatremia, as well as low blood sodium levels or hyponatremia. So let's look at the life story of blood sodium, the ADME of sodium. So sodium is an element, so we do not make sodium, so it has to come from the diet. So the origin of sodium is from the diet, which means absorption to the GI tract, and from there it is absorbed into the bloodstream. The absorption from the GI tract may involve some paracellular transport. So in this case, sodium in the GI tract at a higher concentration will passively travel between the intestinal cells. And typically when sodium goes in one direction, we often see water following that, because water simply travels from low osmolality to high osmolality. And sodium, as sodium enters a compartment, it increases the osmolality, and that makes water follow sodium. And as we discussed before, this paracellular transport is controlled by tight junction proteins that are present between the intestinal cells. Now, most of the sodium is absorbed by the intestinal cells through what we call transcellular transport. So remember, in transcellular transport, the sodium or whatever is being absorbed will actually cross the whole cell and eventually enter the bloodstream. Now, sodium is a very water-soluble substance, so there is no way it's going to cross the hydrophobic plasma membrane of the cells. So it has to go through or be taken up by special transport proteins for sodium. So during a meal, there are two very important proteins that take sodium in together with nutrients. One is the SGLT that takes in not only sodium but also glucose. So this is the sodium-dependent glucose transporter, or the sodium glucose link transporter, SGLT. Another transport protein for sodium is one that absorbs amino acids, various amino acids, together with sodium. And this is an example of this is the solute carrier SLC family of transport proteins that bring in not only sodium but also amino acids. And now the sodium concentration, as more sodium enters here, from the cavity, the concentration of sodium will increase in the cell. So to make sure that this sodium concentration is always kept at low levels, we have the sodium-potassium pumps that are actively using energy, pump sodium out in return for potassium. So the sodium-potassium ATPase pumps are essential for this absorption because they keep the sodium concentration inside the cell at very low levels. Now, another transcellular transport which is often seen between meals and happens mostly in the ileum as well as the colon, involves these two transport proteins. One is the sodium-dependent hydrogen exchanger, brings in sodium, kicks out protons. So these are NHE, sodium-hydrogen exchanges, such as NHE3, NHE2, NHE8. The other protein is the ENaC, epithelial sodium channels. So these are simple sodium channels that allow sodium from a high concentration to enter into the cell where the sodium concentration is very low due to these sodium-potassium pumps. It has been observed that hormones such as aldosterone can help increase this sodium uptake to the NHC as well as ENaC that happens between meals, especially in the ileum as well as the colon. What about distribution? Now, sodium is very water-soluble, being an ion. The concentration is about 135 to 145 millimolar. It simply dissolves in the water, so sodium aqueous. As we mentioned, as sodium enters a compartment, water typically follows because of the osmolarity changes. Now, the distribution of sodium in a compartment depends on the sodium concentration difference as well as the presence of transport proteins for sodium. As we mentioned, sodium cannot cross the plasma membrane, so it does require some sort of a transport protein, and there must be a difference in concentration between one compartment where the sodium originates and the compartment where it enters, where the sodium concentration should be low. Here the sodium concentration should be high. And that concentration difference will drive the sodium through the transport protein into that direction. So one thing we have to keep in mind when we talk about sodium is its very close association with water. So while sodium enters a compartment from a high concentration of sodium to a compartment with low concentration of sodium, water will enter a compartment based on osmolality difference. So water in a region of low osmolality will enter a compartment that has higher osmolality. Water is more freely permeable across cell membranes, and that's probably because the amphiphilic lipids of the cell membranes are very dynamic structures, and as they move, there are probably gaps that are small enough for water molecules to travel. However, the presence of water proteins, proteins that are specific for water transport, especially aquaporins. So if a cell has aquaporins, then the water transport will be even much faster. Metabolism of sodium. Well, sodium is not made or broken down being an element. However, it is distributed throughout the body. It has been estimated that total amount of sodium in an adult male is about 90 grams. There's about 5% of these 90 grams is present inside the cell at a concentration of about 10 millimolar. 40% of these 90 grams is present in the extracellular fluid. That means the bloodstream as well as the fluid outside the cell. And the concentration in the ECF, including the blood, is about 140 millimolar. Most of the sodium, about 55%, is found in skeleton as well as connective tissue. And finally, excretion. How is sodium eliminated? About 5% of sodium is lost in the feces, sweat, as well as secretions such as tears. But most of the sodium, being very water soluble, is excreted by the kidneys. It's almost 95%. So let's look at this renal excretion of sodium. So sodium in the kidneys, in the bloodstream, being a very small water-soluble ion, is readily filtered by glomerular filtration. In the proximal convoluted tubule, about 65% of the sodium is reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. In the ascending limb, the thin ascending limb of the loop of Henle, this area here, some sodium is actually secreted out of the tubule. Then in the thick ascending limb of the loop of Henle, TAL, about 25% filtered sodium is reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. In the distal convoluted tubule, about 5 to 10% of the sodium is reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. And in the collecting duct, about 2% of the sodium is reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. So this means at the end, only about 1% of the sodium that is filtered is excreted into the urine. Also, please note that the hormone aldosterone that we'll talk about in the next video under the renin-angiotensin system, a very important system, aldosterone acts mostly here at the distal convoluted tubule as well as the collecting duct and helps in the reabsorption of sodium. So let's look at the various transport proteins involved in the reabsorption of sodium. At the PCT, we have this sodium glucose link transporter that helps bring in sodium from the cavity, from the tubule cavity, back into the bloodstream. Then we also have this sodium hydrogen exchanger that helps bring sodium in exchange for protons. And then we have this sodium dependent phosphate cotransporter, NPT, that brings in phosphate as well as sodium. In the thick ascending limb, where 25% sodium reabsorption occurs, we have the NKCC, this sodium-dependent potassium chloride cotransporter that brings in sodium chloride as well as potassium. This potassium then is sent out back into the cavity by this protein ROMK. The chloride is sent out of the cell through this CLCKB protein, and because a lot of chloride is on this side, a lot of potassium on this side, potassium being positively charged, so we have a positive tubular cavity, while this side here is negative. And this difference in the electrical potential helps drive sodium as well as other cations from the cavity between the cells and into the bloodstream by paracellular transport. So there's a little bit of paracellular transport of sodium that also occurs in the thick ascending limb. In the distal convoluted tubule, one of the major proteins that helps bring in sodium from the cavity back into the bloodstream is this protein called sodium-dependent chloride cotransporter, or NCC. And once again, this chloride here is sent out from the basolateral side into the bloodstream, while the sodium is sent out into the bloodstream by the sodium-potassium pump. Note that aldosterone plays a very important role here. Aldosterone actually increases the expression as well as activation of this NCC, and therefore aldosterone enhances sodium reabsorption from the distal convoluted tubule. In the collecting duct, one of the major proteins that helps in the reabsorption of sodium is ENaC, which is epithelial sodium channel. And once again, aldosterone increases the expression of ENaC as well as decreases the breakdown, the degradation of ENaC. And by doing this, there will be more ENaC, which means more sodium will be reabsorbed from the cavity back into the bloodstream. So we'll talk about this very important effect of aldosterone in the next video on the renin-angiotensin system. So that's a little bit about the ADME of sodium. In the next video, we shall look at the very important physiological system called renin-angiotensin system, as well as discuss a few other important concepts on sodium before we discuss hypernatremia as well as hyponatremia in future videos. So until the next video, once again, thank you very much for watching and supporting this channel. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and we'll hopefully see you soon in the next video.